Zuri thought she was alone. For 2 years, she worked the night shift for the most lethal man in Tokyo, Kenji Sato, believing she was just a ghost in his machine. She spent every night terrified of the shadows following her home, never realizing those shadows were her only protection. But tonight, she found Kenji's private surveillance room, a wall of screens tracking her every heartbeat. He wasn't just her boss, he was her obsessed guardian. And as the Yakuza wars reach her front door, she's about to learn that being the Iron Dragon's secret obsession is the only thing keeping her alive. Stay tuned for a story of dark loyalty, silent protection, and the ultimate instant karma. The air in Shinjuku at 3 in the morning didn't just feel cold, it felt electric, charged with the frantic, artificial hum of a city that refused to sleep. Far below the 85th floor of the Sato Global Tower, the neon veins of Kabuki-cho throbbed in shades of violent pink and electric blue. But up here, in the inner sanctum of the Iron Dragon, the only sound was the rhythmic, steady clicking of a mechanical keyboard and the low, pressurized hiss of the climate control. Zuri Okoro adjusted her noise-canceling headphones, her eyes scanning a sea of digital manifests that would make a seasoned customs agent dizzy. As the senior night logistics coordinator, Zuri was the silent heartbeat of Kenji Sato's multi-billion-dollar shipping front. She dealt in numbers, transit times, and weight distributions. She was brilliant, efficient, and, most importantly, she was a ghost. In a city of 14 million souls, Zuri had mastered the art of being invisible. She had no family in Japan, no close friends to grab drinks with in Golden Guy, and a bank account dedicated to a single, relentless purpose, paying for her mother's specialized cardiac care back in Lagos. Manifest 8-0-9 Alpha is cleared for the Yokohama terminal, Zuri whispered to the empty, cavernous office. Her voice was the only human thing in the room. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, Kenji Sato didn't make sounds when he moved, it was a change in the very molecules of the air. It became heavier, smelling of expensive sandalwood, rain-dampened wool, and the faint, unmistakable metallic tang of a cleaned firearm. Zuri didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The server lag at the port was 4 minutes, Mr. Sato. I've already accounted for the delay in the inland trucking schedule. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, a voice like crushed velvet over ice cut through the dark. You're predictable, Zuri. It's a dangerous trait in this part of the city. Zuri turned slowly in her ergonomic chair. Kenji Sato stood in the doorway of his private office, framed by the skeletal glow of the Tokyo skyline. He was a man of sharp angles and lethal grace. His black suit was tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin, and the thin, silver scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to his jawline caught the dim light, a permanent reminder of the coup he had survived to claim the Sato Gumi. Predictability is what keeps your ships on time, sir, Zuri replied, her voice steady. She was one of the few people in Tokyo who could look Kenji in the eye without flinching. Kenji stepped into the small pool of light cast by her desk lamp. He looked exhausted, yet wired with a terrifying intensity. His dark, fathomless eyes didn't look at her monitors. They looked at her, tracking the pulse in her neck, the slight tension in her shoulders. It's 3:12 a.m., Kenji murmured, his voice dropping an octave. The Roppongi line stopped running hours ago. Tell me, how exactly do you intend to get to your apartment? I walk, Mr. Sato. The air helps me clear my head after 10 hours of spreadsheets. Kenji's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the scarred skin. You walk. Through the Shinjuku back alleys. While the Fuji clan is currently burning down every warehouse that doesn't pay their tribute. Zuri stood up, refusing to be towered over. She was a foot shorter than him, but her spine was a rod of tempered steel. I've lived in much tougher places than Tokyo, sir. I stay in the light, I keep my head down, and I mind my business. I'm nobody. Nobody notices a logistics clerk. Kenji took a step forward, invading her personal space until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. The power he exuded was magnetic, a dark pull that made her heart hammer against her ribs. You think you're invisible because you're quiet, Kenji whispered, leaning down until his lips were inches from her ear. But in my world, Zuri, a beautiful woman walking alone in the dark isn't invisible. She's an invitation. Zuri felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Is that a threat, Mr. Sato? It's a fact, he snapped, pulling back. His eyes searched hers, looking for a crack in her resolve. He had spent 2 years watching her, not just on the security feeds, but from the shadows of his own office. He stayed late because she stayed late. He told himself it was because he didn't trust her, that he was looking for signs of a leak. But the truth was far more pathetic. Zuri was the only clean thing in a life built on blood and betrayal. Her quiet dignity was the only thing that kept him anchored to a world that wasn't entirely made of violence. Leave, Kenji commanded. I've paged a private car. It's waiting in the basement. I don't accept rides from the boss, Zuri said, her stubborn pride flaring. She grabbed her bag and her cracked medical textbook, the one she studied during her breaks. I'm not part of your inner circle, Mr. Sato. I'm an employee. I'll see you at 9 p.m. She walked past him, her shoulder brushing his arm. The contact felt like a live wire, a jolt of pure energy that made her breath hitch. She didn't look back as she entered the elevator. Kenji stood in the empty office, his hand gripping the edge of her desk. His fingers traced the spot where her hand had rested just moments before. He waited until the elevator lights signaled her arrival at the ground floor. He didn't go back to his desk. He walked to the hidden panel in the corner of his office and punched in a biometric code. A heavy oak door slid open, revealing a room that existed on no floor plan. It was a surveillance hub. 12 monitors lined the wall, each one high definition and crystal clear. One showed the street outside her apartment in Roppongi. Another showed the specific convenience store where she bought her morning coffee. But the largest screen was a live, thermal overlay map of the Shinjuku streets. Kenji picked up a specialized radio. Unit 4, she's out. She's walking the Shinjuku-Dori route. Copy, boss, a voice crackled back. We're already in position. 2 blocks back, headlights off. If anyone so much as breathes in her direction, Kenji said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl, don't ask for permission. Erase them. Kenji sat in a leather chair, his eyes fixed on the tiny red dot moving across the map. He watched her turn a corner into a particularly dark stretch of the city. His heart, a cold organ he'd thought was long dead, thudded painfully in his chest. Zuri thought she was walking home alone. She thought the black SUVs she saw in the distance were just part of the city's nightlife. She had spent 2 years terrified of the shadows that followed her, never realizing that the shadows were the only things keeping the real monsters at bay. She didn't know that 3 months ago, when a group of drunken thugs had tried to follow her into her building, they had disappeared before they reached the front door. She didn't know that her landlord had stopped trying to overcharge her because a man with a dragon tattoo had paid him a very quiet, very terrifying visit. Kenji watched the screen as a silver sedan began to slow down near Zuri's walking path. His grip tightened on the radio, his knuckles turning white. Unit 4, status on the silver sedan, he barked. Local street gang, boss. Looks like they're looking for trouble. Intercept. Now. On the screen, Kenji watched as a massive black SUV lunged from a side street, cutting off the silver sedan with surgical precision. The sedan swerved, hitting a row of trash cans. Zuri, startled by the noise, picked up her pace, clutching her bag to her chest and disappearing around a corner, completely unaware that a kidnapping attempt had just been thwarted 50 yards behind her. Kenji let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He leaned back, watching her red dot finally reach the safety of her apartment building. He stayed in that room for another hour, watching the feed of her window until the lights went out. He was the Iron Dragon, the man who ruled Tokyo's underworld with a flick of his wrist. He was a billionaire, a king, and a killer. But as he sat in the flickering blue light of the monitors, he realized he was also a prisoner. He was obsessed with a woman who didn't even know his first name. He was a silent protector, a man who loved from the dark because he knew that the moment he stepped into the light, he would bring the war with him. Soon, Zuri, he whispered to the screen. Soon the shadows won't be enough. And when that day comes, I hope you're ready for the monster I've become to keep you safe. He turned off the monitors, leaving the room in total darkness, and walked back out into his empire, a man who owned everything but the one thing he truly wanted. The following 3 weeks in Tokyo were a blur of rain and rising adrenaline. The Iron Dragon of the Sato Gumi was no longer just a brooding presence in the office. Kenji Sato had become a phantom. Zuri saw him less, but she felt him more. The air in the executive suite was thick with a new kind of tension, like the silence before a lightning strike. The Yakuza wars were no longer whispers in the tabloids. The Fuji clan had become desperate, launching bold, daylight attacks on shipping hubs. Zuri saw the toll it took on the company. The security guards in the lobby no longer smiled, they stood with hands hovering near their waistbands, eyes scanning every briefcase and delivery box with lethal intent. But for Zuri, the strangest change was the SUVs. Every night for 2 years, she had walked home. And every night, she had caught glimpses of them, blacked-out windows, idling in the rain, always 2 blocks behind. Recently, they had closed the gap. She felt watched. She felt followed. Every time a car door slammed or a shadow moved in a Roppongi alley, her heart climbed into her throat. She lived in a state of constant, low-grade terror, clutching her pepper spray until her knuckles turned white. She was tired of being a ghost. She was tired of being afraid. On a Tuesday night, when the rain was coming down in gray sheets, Zuri decided to confront the source. Kenji had been in a high-level strategy meeting for 6 hours. The office was supposedly empty, save for the skeleton security crew. Zuri didn't leave at her usual 3 a.m. Instead, she took the service elevator up to the 92nd floor, the executive penthouse suite. She knew it was a breach of contract. She knew Kenji valued his privacy above all else. But if he was the one letting the Fuji clan track her, she needed to know why. The hallway was a gallery of minimalist art and cold marble. She reached the double oak doors of his private study. They were unlocked. Zuri stepped inside, her breath hitching. The room smelled of the same sandalwood and iron she had come to associate with Kenji. But he wasn't there. The desk was clean, the monitors off. She turned to leave, her heart hammering against her ribs, when she noticed it. A faint blue glow emanated from behind a heavy silk tapestry at the far end of the room. Driven by a mix of fear and defiance, Zuri pulled the tapestry aside. Behind it sat a heavy, industrial-grade steel door with a biometric scanner. To her shock, the door was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. She pushed it open. The room beyond was not an office. It was a cathedral of surveillance. 12 high-definition monitors lined the walls, glowing with a ghostly, neon light. Zuri stood frozen in the center of the room, her bag slipping from her shoulder and hitting the floor with a dull thud. She wasn't looking at shipping manifests or bank accounts. The largest screen showed a live feed of her own front door in Roppongi. Another showed the grocery store where she bought her plantains on Saturdays. A third showed the interior of the very elevator she had just stepped out of. But it was the wall of physical files that broke her heart. There were photos of her. Hundreds of them. Zuri at the bus stop. Zuri laughing at a joke a street vendor made a year ago. Zuri crying at her mother's digital bedside. And then, there was the folder marked Lagos. Inside were receipts for medical equipment she knew her mother's hospital couldn't afford, ventilators, cardiac monitors, specialized medication, all paid for by an anonymous donor through a Sato Global shell company. "It's the only way I can sleep," a voice growled from the darkness of the corner. Zuri spun around, her face hot with a mix of fury and profound vulnerability. Kenji sat in a low leather chair, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out by his own secrets. "You've been stalking me." Zuri's voice cracked, vibrating with a high-pitched edge of betrayal. "For 2 years. You let me walk through this city in terror, thinking the Fuji clan was coming for me, when it was you?" Kenji stood, his frame casting a long, jagged shadow across the wall of screens. He walked into the light, and for the first time, Zuri saw the raw, terrifying obsession in his eyes. He didn't look like a boss. He looked like a man possessed. "The Fuji clan was coming for you, Zuri," Kenji said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They've tried to snatch you 4 times. Once at the station. Twice in your own lobby. And once, 3 months ago, while you were looking at postcards in a shop in Shinjuku." Zuri blinked, her mind racing. I never saw them. Because they never reached you." Kenji stepped into her space, his presence overwhelming. "My men intercepted them in the alleys. They handled it before you could even hear a scream. You stayed in the light because I kept the darkness at my own throat." "Why?" Zuri shouted, stepping back until she hit the desk. "I'm a logistics clerk. I'm a nobody to you. I'm just a line item on your payroll." Kenji pinned her against the desk, his hands slamming down on either side of her. He leaned in until their foreheads were almost touching, his breath warm against her skin. "Because you are the only thing in this city that isn't for sale," Kenji whispered, his voice thick with a decade of repressed emotion. "I spent my life surrounded by people who want my head or my money. Then you walked in. You worked late. You studied your textbooks. You didn't care who I was. You were just Zuri." His thumb reached out, tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that was more frightening than his rage. "I didn't start watching you to control you," he confessed, his dark eyes searching hers. "I started watching you because I couldn't stop. And then I realized that the moment I took my eyes off you, the world would try to break you just to get to me. You aren't a line item, Zuri. You are my only weakness. And in my world, weaknesses have to be guarded with every drop of blood I have." Zuri's heart was slamming against her ribs. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a magnetic, primal pull. He was a monster, a king of the underworld, but he had spent 2 years in the shadows just to make sure she could walk in the light. "The SUVs." She whispered. "My men," he confirmed. "They have orders to die before they let a hand touch you." "And the hospital in Lagos?" Kenji's expression softened, a rare, human flicker crossing his scarred face. "Your mother deserves the best care. And you deserve to work because you want to, not because you're drowning in debt." Zuri felt tears pricking her eyes, tears of anger, shock, and a strange, overwhelming sense of being seen. No one had ever protected her. No one had ever looked out for her. She had been the one taking care of everyone else her entire life. "You should have told me," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If I told you, you would have run," Kenji said, his hand moving to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. "And I've spent too much time in the dark to let my light walk away now." He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a tentative, high-stakes question. Zuri didn't pull away. She reached up, her fingers finding the silver scar on his jaw, and closed the gap. The kiss tasted like salt, sandalwood, and the violent realization that her life as a ghost was over. But as they stood in the glow of the surveillance monitors, a red light began to flash on the center screen. A thermal map of the basement showed 6 unauthorized heat signatures entering through the service bay. Kenji pulled back, his Iron Dragon mask snapping back into place instantly. He reached for the hidden holster at the small of his back. "Marcus," Kenji growled, referring to his treasurer. "He's the only one who has the override codes for the basement. The war isn't coming anymore, Zuri. It's here." He grabbed her hand, his grip like iron. "The shadow isn't enough anymore. You're coming with me to the panic room. And then, I'm going to show Marcus exactly what happens when you try to burn down a dragon's home." The red light on the center monitor didn't just flash, it pulsed like a dying heart. The silence of the surveillance room was replaced by the low-frequency thrum of an emergency lockdown. In the high-definition thermal feed, the 6 heat signatures moved with a military precision that Zuri recognized from Kenji's own men. These weren't street thugs. These were professionals. "Marcus," Zuri whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "I saw the diverted funds in the logistics ledger, Kenji. He wasn't just skimming. He was buying loyalty from the Fuji clan's top mercenaries." Kenji didn't waste a second. He slammed his hand against a hidden panel beneath the monitor array. A heavy, pneumatic hiss echoed through the room as a section of the wall slid back, revealing a localized armory. He didn't grab a rifle, he reached for a customized Beretta and 2 spare magazines, his movements economical and terrifyingly calm. "Zuri, listen to me," Kenji said, turning to her. The raw obsession she had seen moments ago was now buried under a layer of cold, command-driven steel. "The elevator is already locked out from the floor below. They're coming up the service stairs. Marcus knows the layout, but he doesn't know about this room." "He's coming for the books," Zuri said, her mind racing. "The digital keys to the Sato Gumi accounts are on your main terminal. If he gets those, he can erase your entire existence before sunrise." Kenji gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging into her skin, not to hurt, but to anchor her. "He's coming for more than the books. He's coming to tie up the only loose end that can prove his treason. You." He pulled her toward the back of the surveillance hub, where a small, reinforced steel door stood camouflaged against the server racks. "This is the primary panic room. It has its own oxygen supply and an independent satellite uplink. Enter code 1-1-0-4. It's the day you started working here." Zuri felt a jolt of electricity at the mention of the code. He had memorized the day she entered his life. "What about you? You can't fight 6 of them alone." Kenji's lips pulled back into a ghost of a smile, a dark, jagged expression that reminded her why he was called the Iron Dragon. "I'm not alone. I'm in my house. And in this house, I am the god of the shadows." He pushed her into the small, lit chamber and hit the seal. The door closed with a final, heavy thud, leaving Zuri in a room filled with monitors that mirrored the ones outside. She sat on the small bench, her hands shaking, watching the screens as the drama unfolded. On the monitor, she saw Kenji move. He didn't stay in the surveillance room. He stepped back into his main study, but he didn't turn on the lights. He moved to the center of the room and simply disappeared. He melted into the darkness of the heavy velvet curtains and the obsidian furniture. Seconds later, the study doors exploded. Marcus Vale stepped through the smoke, followed by 4 men in tactical gear. Marcus, the man who had handled Kenji's finances for a decade, looked different. The submissive, bean-counter posture was gone. He held a high-caliber pistol with practiced ease, his face twisted into a sneer of triumph. "Check the terminal." Marcus barked at his men. "And find the girl. She's here somewhere. I want her alive just long enough to give me the decryption password for the logistics shell." Zuri watched from the panic room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the mercenaries fan out, their suppressed weapons sweeping the room. One of them approached the very tapestry that hid the surveillance hub. "There's nothing here, Marcus," one of the men called out. "The CEO must have fled to the roof." "He wouldn't leave the girl," Marcus spat, walking toward Kenji's desk. He slammed his fist onto the obsidian surface. "Kenji. I know you're listening. I've already sent the transfer orders to the Fuji clan. By dawn, the Sato Gumi will be a memory, and I'll be the one sitting in this chair. Give me the girl, and I'll let you walk to the harbor. You can take a boat and never look back." Silence was the only response. "Fine," Marcus growled. "Burn it. Burn the whole floor." As one of the mercenaries reached for a thermal incendiary device, the shadows behind him seemed to detach themselves from the wall. It happened so fast Zuri almost missed it on the high-speed camera. Kenji appeared behind the first man like a vengeful spirit. A single, muffled strike to the throat, a twist of the neck, and the mercenary was down before his body hit the floor. Kenji didn't stop. He used the falling body as a shield, pivoting as the second man turned to fire. Thwip. Thwip. 2 shots from Kenji's Beretta found their marks. The second and third mercenaries dropped. Contact. Marcus screamed, diving behind the heavy leather sofa. He's in the room. Kill him. The remaining 2 mercenaries began blind firing into the darkness, the suppressed rounds shredding the expensive art and shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows. Glass rained down like diamonds in the red emergency light. From the panic room, Zuri saw her opportunity. She realized Marcus was hiding right next to the auxiliary environmental controls. If she could trigger the localized halon gas discharge, the system meant to put out server fires, it would suck the oxygen out of the main study for 60 seconds. It wouldn't kill them, but it would drop them to their knees. Her fingers flew over the panic room's touchscreen. System override. Zone 1. Discharge. A deafening hiss filled the study. A cloud of white gas erupted from the ceiling vents. Marcus and the 2 remaining gunmen began to gasp, their hands flying to their throats as the oxygen levels plummeted. They stumbled, their vision blurring as the halon did its work. Kenji, who had anticipated the move the moment he heard the vents click, had already pulled a small emergency respirator from his belt. He moved through the white fog like a wraith. Zuri watched as Kenji disarmed the last 2 men with brutal efficiency, tossing their weapons into the broken glass of the balcony. Then, he walked toward Marcus. Marcus was on the floor, crawling toward the door, his face purple as he struggled to breathe. Kenji reached down, grabbed Marcus by the collar, and hauled him up. As the halon cleared and the vents began pumping fresh air back in, Kenji slammed Marcus against the reinforced glass of the window. You thought you could sell my world, Marcus? Kenji's voice was a low, terrifying growl that Zuri could hear through the intercom. You thought you could put a price on Zuri? I did it for the Gumi, Marcus wheezed, his eyes bulging with terror. You were getting soft, Kenji. Obsessing over a foreigner, a clerk, you were going to ruin us. I am the Gumi, Kenji hissed. And you are nothing but a thief who forgot his place. Kenji didn't pull the trigger. That would have been too easy. Instead, he pulled a phone from Marcus's pocket, the one Marcus had used to coordinate with the Fuji clan. I've already redirected your Cayman transfers, Marcus, Kenji said, a cold, predatory light in his eyes. They didn't go to the Fuji clan. They went to a public bounty fund. As of 30 seconds ago, every street gang in Tokyo has a $10 million notification on their phones. Your face is the target. Marcus's face drained of what little color remained. You can't. They'll tear me apart. Instant karma is a debt that always collects, Marcus, Kenji said. He tossed Marcus toward his men, who had finally breached the stairwell from the floor below. Take him to the harbor. Leave him at the Fuji docks. Let them explain to him why their money never arrived. The room was cleared in minutes. The tactical teams moved with the silence of professionals, removing the bodies and the debris. The red light stopped pulsing, replaced by the soft, warm glow of the normal evening lamps. Kenji stood in the center of the ruined study, his chest heaving slightly. He looked down at his hands, which were stained with the dust of the struggle. He looked older, more scarred, but the weight of the secret was finally gone. He walked to the panic room and entered the code. The door slid open, and Zuri stepped out. She didn't look at the room, she looked at him. She saw the man who had stalked her, protected her, and nearly died for her. You used the halon, Kenji said, a trace of genuine surprise in his voice. You saved me a lot of ammunition, Zuri. You shouldn't have been in there alone, she said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline began to fade. Kenji walked toward her, closing the distance until they were inches apart. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. I told you. I've been watching you for 2 years. I knew you were smart. I didn't know you were a warrior. He pulled her into his arms, and this time, the kiss didn't taste like fear. It tasted like a beginning. The Iron Dragon had burned his bridges to the past, and in the ashes, he had found the only thing that mattered. 1 month later. The neon lights of Shinjuku still hummed, and the black SUVs still idled in the shadows, but everything had changed. Zuri sat in the back of a luxury sedan, her laptop open as she coordinated a shipment of medical supplies. But she wasn't in a cramped office anymore. She was sitting next to Kenji as they drove toward the private airfield. The clinic in Lagos has its first pediatric wing opening next week, Zuri said, showing him the digital blueprints. The foundation is calling it the Sato Okoro Center. Kenji looked at the screen, then at her. He reached out, taking her hand in his thumb tracing the new, platinum band on her finger, a simple ring with a single, brilliant black diamond. It's a good name, he said. Kenji, she said, turning to him. Do you still have the monitors? In the new house? Kenji went quiet for a moment. A small, honest smile touched his lips, the kind of smile that never made it into the newspapers. Only the ones for the perimeter security, Zuri. I don't need to watch you from a screen anymore. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. Because from now on, I'm never going to let you out of my sight. As the car sped through the Tokyo night, Zuri realized that being the Iron Dragon's obsession wasn't a prison. It was a throne. And as long as they stood together, the shadows would never be a place of fear again, they would be their sanctuary. A man who rules the darkness will burn the world to keep his light. Marcus thought he could use Zuri to break the dragon, but he only succeeded in forging an unbreakable bond. If you believe that true love is worth the obsession, hit that like button. Subscribe to Pedri's Love Stories for more AMBW tales of power, protection, and the ultimate karma. What should the Iron Dragon do next? Tell us in the comments. See you in the next story.